Hello, hello, everybody. Sorry, we're running a little bit late today. All right, I think everybody's in. So thank you for being here. I'm going to turn it right over to Camilla, who is going to introduce our guest for today.
All right, thank you everyone who is here. And I'm really excited to introduce our speaker today. She has a lot of experience. So today you're going to be hearing from Catherine Massie. She is a Montessori special educator and Montessori administrator. She founded 2 public Montessori charter schools in Frederick, Maryland, holds an AMI elementary diploma in adolescent orientation, and MAT elementary and special education. She is a multisensory math tutor, executive function coach, and uses the Dubbard Association method in her teachings. She is also an international advocate for children with developmental learning differences and a co-founder and director of Montessori Medical Partnership for Inclusion. She's got a great presentation for you, and we're very fortunate to be hearing her wisdom today. So, Catherine.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Camilla and Camille, for giving me this opportunity to be here today. I'm really honored to always talk with administrators, because when you're talking about Montessori inclusion, it really requires a whole school approach to be successful. So I love speaking to administrators. Today I'm going to share with you a vision of Montessori inclusion that reconnects Dr. Montessori's educational legacy developed for the typical child with the developmental habilitation work of Drs. Itard, Sagan, and Montessori. This vision has been developing experimentally around the world all the way back into the 1960s, although the work hasn't been carried out in English, so a lot of Americans are not familiar with this work. I first want to recognize and thank all the Montessori administrators for your service during this international health crisis. You are on the front lines with your teachers and your support staff, and they couldn't be there without you and your leadership. And in these days, it really takes courage and strength and endurance. And I wish you all good health and to lead strong for your staff, families, and children that you're serving around the world. So thank you. Okay, so I have a very little time to talk. I usually like to talk for a really long time. So I'm trying to focus on a couple little bites that will be helpful for you. So the first one I thought is just talking about Montessori inclusion in general and what that means, and some of the legacy behind that. And then I do want to give you something to go away with that's practical. So when I was administrator of a private Montessori school in Frederick, I put together a 4-part parent education plan that I want to share with you, because it's a wonderful way of building community to support children with varying needs at your Montessori school. So I first want to always point out that inclusion is not really an option. It's a human right, and it's recognized internationally under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And the United States has signed this agreement, but it hasn't been ratified yet by Congress. It came out in 2007, but the last time it went up for a vote, it only missed being ratified by 1 vote. So I'm thinking that very soon we're going to have be a signatory of this important human rights convention. And this sets an incredibly high bar for inclusion. But we do have the Americans with Disabilities Act, and that's a really important protection for families who have children with disabilities. And it applies also to private schools and private Montessori schools. And so it's really good to make sure that you understand the protections that they have. So just that as a backdrop. So let's talk a little bit about Montessori inclusion. So I've been doing research for about 20 years on Montessori in special education uses, because I was training as a special educator, and I was really excited about the potential use of Montessori as special education. And then also inclusion. I did my elementary training in Bergamo. And while I was there, I found out about a program in Munich, Germany. And the second year I spent in Bergamo, I actually went there and spent a week of my observation at Action Sonnenschein School. And so that is an inclusive Montessori model that has been in existence since 1968. And the language barrier is substantial still these days. It's hard to believe, but it is. And so since then, I've been learning all about how, Montessori inclusion can work in a really exceptional way. And I'm bringing that work to the United States. So in my study of Dr. Montessori's early writings, especially writing about her experiences before 1907, which is when we usually think about the beginning of Montessori education, it becomes very clear that the educational inclusion is not a tangential issue for Montessori schools. It's not like an add-on program or something that you can choose to adopt or not. And it's not solely the responsibility of public Montessori schools, that it's really it's really embodied within the essence of what Montessori's approach is. So serving children with developmental and learning differences really is at the center of what Montessori education is about. So Dr. Montessori, you probably know some of this history, was the first international advocate for the rights of children with disabilities to be included in the educational system. And she became very well known for this, and in 1897 was invited to speak about it at an international teachers conference in Torino, Italy. In 1915, she wrote about it, thinking back to those days, and she said, between physicians and teachers at that time, there was an absolute separation. They never met in their social and scientific work. Consequently, I determined to get the problem of the child with a disability out of the field of medicine, bringing them into the educational field. And so, the mayor of Rome heard about her famous speech and basically said, well, here, I'm going to give you that opportunity. And so in 1898, she opened the first educational program in Italy for children with disabilities and children excluded from the public schools. And you've probably heard of her famous orthophrenic school. So at this school, she started with 60 children who had been more or less warehoused at the mental hospitals. And then 50 children she added who were rejected from the public schools for being learning disabled and ungovernable, basically children who were not considered educable in the public schools. And, she says that these children, for the most part, belong to the poorest class. And can you imagine a greater challenge than this? She had started with 109 students who have, really severe developmental disabilities, or they had learning disabilities so that they couldn't participate in the public schools. And can you imagine being the administrator of a school full of children judged by society to be uneducable? I mean, it's really incredible that, Dr. Montessori took on this challenge. It tells you a lot about her strong sense of social justice and about her belief in the promise of science, specifically an approach that would bridge developmental medicine and education. Today, we call this scientific and medical pedagogy. Although we all have practiced scientific pedagogy, medical pedagogy is something that so far exists in Europe. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So from this audacious experiment, what we know as Montessori education really begins. And the success that Montessori had with over 100 children with these vastly diverse and complex needs, that it rocketed her to international fame. But the first point I want to make is that in order to understand what is Montessori inclusion, we have to understand that the Montessori approach began in 1898, not in 1907, where she worked with predominantly typical children. So how did she make this miracle happen? She connected the medical field of developmental science with education, specifically a special education she learned about from Itard and Sagan. And she entered into transdisciplinary practice. That's medicine and education combined to create something entirely new. So the question that we face as Montessorians today is Montessori for all children, or are some children not a good fit for Montessori? Because we hear this a lot, especially as administrators, when we are having to let a family know that we can't meet their child's needs. You know, I hear the conversation that, well, Montessori may not be a good fit for your child. But on the other hand, as Montessorians, you know, with our training and knowledge of the history of Montessori, we just have this intuition that why isn't it working? Why can't we make it work? And this is super important to the practice and to the expansion of Montessori inclusion, because what it means is that Montessori, based on where it came from, special education, can be for all children. But in order to do that, we need to move closer to what Dr. Montessori did, which was, as a medical person and educator, in herself combined both fields. So we need to reconnect with medical professionals who can help us see the developmental challenges of the children that, as educators, we're not prepared and trained to see, and also to help us with, you know, what kinds of supports, how can we help this child be successful in this environment. So when I was in my Montessori training, the director of training liked to stump us with hard questions like, in 3 words, what is Montessori education? Some of you may know this because you'll never forget it once you hear it, but she says in 3 words, it's aid to life. And that's really important to the concept of what is Montessori inclusion. It's aid to life. But when you have children who have different needs than typical children, that requires different aids to help their life. So another important quote from the early days, this was from a 1913 Rome lecture. Dr. Montessori says, "I do not believe and I do not claim to have given a new method, but I do claim to have given a method for a new science." And another quote that's along the lines of this later in the book, she says, "I repeat and insist, I did not wish to originate a method of education, nor am I the author of a method of education. I've helped some children to live, and I have set forth the means which I found necessary. And these means are a method of education. And if these means of help are a method of education for children of this age, then all aids to the development of humanity are also methods of education." So I think it's really important to look at some of her writings about this, because to really understand what is meant by the Montessori method, we need to look at the approach she uses and not just our training. And I don't have time today to go into all of her quotes and everything, but she was very clear that her life's work was dedicated to taking what she did at the orthophrenic school and applying it to typical children, because she believed that it contained the elements for a revolution in society. And actually, Edouard Sagan wrote the same thing in his book in 1866. So I think in order to move in the direction of inclusion, we need to think about the approach and not just the training that we have, which is perfect for typical children. So our work at the Montessori Medical Partnership for Inclusion is guided by two important quotes from Dr. Montessori, and I'll share those with you. So, in this first one, and this was from a book called, it was a textbook that she wrote in 1913 called Pedagogical Anthropology. And she says, "The school constitutes an immense field for research. It is a pedagogical clinic, which in view of its importance can be compared to no other gathering of subjects for study. Thanks to the system of compulsory education, it gathers to itself every living human being of both sexes and of every social caste, normal and abnormal, and it retains them there throughout a most important period of growth." So here she's talking about inclusive education. And then she says, "This is the field, therefore, in which the culture of the human race can really and practically be undertaken, and a joint labor of physician and teacher will sow the seed of a future human hygiene, adapted to achieve perfection in man, both as a species and as a social unit." So this is her beautiful vision of an inclusive educational system. And she explicitly says a joint labor of physician and teacher. And so I find it even sometimes amusing to date when people say, "Oh, you can't have medical people in the school," or, "Oh, they don't belong in the Montessori classroom. We don't want to have medical people here." But yet Dr. Montessori had a very clear vision, and she was a medical person herself. So then the other quote, so that quote really lets us know about her grand vision for inclusion that was going to be a success based on the partnership between the medical and educators. And then this next quote is from the Montessori Method, published in 1909. And this gets kind of at the heart of the issue when we have a child come into our school and we bring them into the classroom, and immediately we see, oh, there's an issue here because this child is not reacting the way that we learned in our trainings or expect them to. They might come in and sweep the shelves on the floor. They might be disruptive to other students. They might have a whole variety of challenging behaviors that interfere with the operation of our orderly classroom and the work of the other students. So then you wonder, well, maybe they need something a little bit different, but that different thing may not be that they need to go to another school. It may be that they need something a little bit different in the classroom. And so this is just a beautiful quote from Dr. Montessori, where she talks about the difference between typical children and, I don't like to use the word deficient, but different children who have developmental and learning differences. She says, "The difference in the reaction between the deficient and normal children in the presentation of didactic material made up of graded stimuli," so this is Children's House level, "this is plainly seen from the fact that the same didactic material used with the children with disabilities and differences makes education possible." So that's what she learned at the orthophrenic school. All those children who were, deemed uneducable by society, she was able to educate them. And we heard stories of how some of them passed the exams with the typical children. While with normal children, it provokes auto education. And that, became one of the inspirations and observations that drove Montessori to dedicate her entire life to pursue this idea of auto education, that the normal child or typical children, you provide this material and they educate themselves, and how empowering that is, and all the other benefits that we know of a child being able to educate themselves. That's what they're talking about here. But too often in our training, we focus so much on this idea of the norm for normal children. Her method is miraculous. It allows them to teach themselves to follow their passions, to develop, you know, their interest and be social and everything that we know about, you know, Montessori education. But that works for typical children. But she's saying very clearly here that there is something different with children who are not typically developing. But she doesn't say it's not for them. She says it makes education possible. So we got to remember that Montessori, we do need the Montessori for children who have developmental and learning differences. It makes education possible for them. But then she goes on in this reading. She says, with the deficient child, it would be necessary to begin with exercises in which the stimuli were much more strongly contrasted, and to arrive at this exercise only after many others had preceded it. So she's talking about accommodations. She's talking about they required something different. The stimuli needed to be, the materials need to be adapted. They needed the accommodation of other work before they even can start with her curriculum. They might need something else. And then she goes on and says, once we arrived at this exercise with a deficient child, it was necessary continually and actively to recall his attention, inviting him to look at the block and showing him the various pieces. And if the child once succeeded in placing all the cylinders properly, he stopped and the game was finished. And that was so different than what she observed with the typical children in San Lorenzo. Remember, she tells the story of a little girl who did the cylinder blocks for like 35 times. And even when they picked her up in the chair and moved her, they're all singing and playing music, she kept working, you know. So when the deficient child committed an error, it was necessary to correct it or to urge him to correct it himself. And when he was able to correct an error, he was usually quite indifferent. So the way we work, the approach we use, the materials, the expectations about how they should respond for children who are not typically developing, she recognized those reactions were different. So we do need to have that idea in mind that different children have different needs. And just because we do something differently doesn't mean we're not following Montessori's method. And it's a really important point. And when we bring these European inclusion trainers over and they talk about all the different types of modifications and adaptations, they've had 50 years of doing this work. And it's just a wonderful gift. The teachers who came to our first training in Milwaukee in 2019 were just there. They were so grateful, first of all, to be given permission to do things differently and the reason why they needed to be done differently, but to also have their eyes open to so many different experimentally developed adaptations and modifications with the different types of children that they had developed and shared with them. So I wanted to share, those are two quotes that are really important for our work at the Montessori Medical Partnership for Inclusion and in bringing this inclusive education to Montessorians in the United States. So the bottom line, and I really don't have a lot of time. I can speak for days on this, but the bottom line is inclusion must be prepared, even in a Montessori school. We must have a preparation of the adults. Both the staff and administrators need to understand what is the dynamic and what is the environment of an inclusive school, and how do all the pieces fit together. Preparing the environments. The environments, need to be adapted for the children that you have. And then preparations of support, adaptations, and developmental materials. So that all of this, you can obviously understand, is a very big work. But you just start with one child and start small and start getting the pieces in place, the staff training, understanding all the issues as administrators, and then you can start moving forward and opening your doors to children with more varied and different needs. So one of the things I'll point out that's really important for administrators in this type of preparation is the numbers. You know, how many children should you have in a class? How many children with the same type of disability? How many children total in the classroom? How many adults in the classroom? You know, medical specialists. All of these considerations need to be made. And so it's really good for administrators to understand how schools that are doing excellent work in inclusion, how they're making it work. And so basically the answer to Montessori inclusion is reconnecting Montessori education to medicine. So it's that transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary work of connecting what we're doing in the classroom and under education with what does this child need to be able to take advantage of their education. So in other words, you know, their health and their habilitation, which means the support that we give them and the therapies and everything that they need in order to optimize their, you know, neurophysiological development. They need all those things as well as the education. And when you can connect them together in a Montessori environment, then that is a truly holistic approach. And it's really, Montessori, I think, is unique because it came from a special education program or platform that was developed for all these different children, that it is capable of supporting inclusion. And so this is moving on to, I'll show you, it sounds like really amazing, and it is, but it's been going on since the 1960s in Munich. So there was a developmental pediatrician. He's very, very, very famous man. He opened numerous fields of science and medical science. And he was probably one of the greatest developmental researchers and pediatricians that ever lived. And he was really focused on children and families with children who had serious disabilities. And he opened the first Kinderzentrum, which means children's clinic, which is an interdisciplinary approach to the health and medical needs of children with disabilities. And he started that back in the 1960s when it was unheard of. So to understand the significance, think about the Mayo Clinic. The Mayo Clinic is world famous because they use this interdisciplinary approach to medicine. So Dr. Hellbrugger started this in Munich, focused on the needs of children and development. So he opened he came across in his work the Montessori program, and there were 2 children who had Down syndrome in the class, and he was shocked. And he was there like, is it okay for them to be here? You know, are they supposed to be here? and how does that work? And of course, then he got to know the Montessori very well. He partnered in 1971 with Mario Montessori, the son of Dr. Montessori. And he set up this Acción Sonnenschein School, the first sort of inclusion by design school. It was Montessori school. And he also set up the Kinderzentrum, which is connected, and an Institute for Social Pediatrics was a strand of pediatrics that he opened. And this is a picture of it today in Germany. It's a huge institute. All the buildings that have green on top, where they have plants and gardens on top, that's Acción Sonnenschein. So that's a school. It goes from 3 years old up through, I think, elementary program. And then it's connected to the Munich Kinderzentrum, which is the largest children's clinic in the country. People come from all over Germany and all over Europe for their specialized help for children. And so you can walk down the hallway and go from the school into the Kinderzentrum. The clinicians, therapists can walk down, and there's observation windows built into all the classrooms so they can observe in the classrooms. So here is Dr. Montessori's vision realized. And it's really, it's really phenomenal. And they do full inclusion of children with all levels of disability. So I just wanted to show that to you so that you know it's there. There's a number of Kinderzentrum around Germany, and they have worked with about 30 different countries in bringing this Montessori-based developmental habilitative approach. And so he intentionally reconnected Dr. Montessori's work for the typical child with developmental habilitative work that Sagan was doing. So he reconnected those two pieces, and it's actually fabulous. And it sounds like, you know, way out there, oh, well, I don't have a medical clinic connected to my school. I don't have a hospital next door. But I want you to know about this work that's going on, because today, you know, especially in the midst of a pandemic, we're not as fearful of medical people on the one hand, and on the other hand, we're seeing that it's such a social justice issue that all of these, that not just disabilities, but all these health issues and that we see during pandemic and the death rates and everything disproportionately impact peoples of color and of living in poverty. And so these two gentlemen are working together, and they've already sent the new president a whole list of their vision of requirements to meet their vision of integrated medical and health care. Medical health care and education. So the organization is called the School-Based Health Alliance, and they've been in existence since the 90s in traditional education. And they operate in 22 states. They're a growing organization. They have tremendously strong data right now that show how effective it is and how much better outcomes they get when at the school they have real medical people and clinicians to look after the general health, dental, and mental health issues of children in schools. And this is across the United States. So it's called the School-Based Health Alliance. And you know, what they write is exactly what I've been talking about, that you can't, just like Montessori talked about, you can't separate the health and the educational needs of the child. If the child's not healthy, not feeling good, they're able to learn. And so it is a coming model. And I feel like since Dr. Montessori said it first, that us Montessorians should get on board and not be left behind. Okay, so putting the medical back into Montessori, how we do. I told you I wanted to give you something practical. So, what are the first steps? So the first steps are providing the staff with professional development on inclusion. It's complicated. Special education has a lot to offer in terms of the tools that they have, and in the different disability areas of the children that you have in your school or children that you would like to serve in your school. Reach out to medical professionals and invite them to come and observe in your school and meet your staff. So this one way that I found was, if you have parents who have children with special needs and you know you're in the process of getting to know them and talking with them, say, hey, you know, who do you work with? Who's your developmental pediatrician, or who's your occupational therapist? And what do you think? Do you really like them? And you know, you can get to know the medical people. That way you can just call up the top clinics in your area. You can, you know, you reach out and find them in other ways. But as in everything, just as with teachers, you know, it all comes down to the person. Some medical professionals look at Montessori and they're like, wow, this is awesome. I can see how this would be so good for the kids that I see. But then other ones, and it was frustrating for me as an administrator when the child would we would recommend the child go to their pediatrician. The pediatrician says, well, Montessori is not the right place for that child. And I knew otherwise, you know, but so you have to find the right people to partner with, and then invite them and give them a, an hour and a half talk on, this is Montessori. This came from the medical field, and get to know them. And then invite, once they get to know your staff, you can invite the medical professionals to give presentation to your families. That's one of the things that I'm going to talk to you about today. I set up a program that was very, very successful, and it really brought down those barriers between the staff and the parents and the medical people. They just became members of the community. So the ultimate goal is the medical people, they just become other friendly faces in the community, and the parents see them there and they say hi. And if something, they're thinking, oh, I'm worried about this, they can ask a question. It's really, from when I started as an administrator to 5 years later, I just have to say it was such a remarkable transformation of the way that the adults thought about therapists, and it really was wonderful. And the medical people get to know about Montessori, and they, like the ones that we developed relationships with, they were very, very enthusiastic. And so it just became a relationship that was beneficial to everybody involved. So I'm going to go into a little more detail about a program. It's a parent education series that you can implement to bring the medical people into your more as members of your community, to get to know each other. This I just threw in there. If you want to start including kids and you're wondering how to which type of disability area to focus on preparing for specific learning disabilities, dyslexia, that's a great place to start. It's 33%. So just look at your local statistics and look at the needs of the children in your population, and that's a good place to start. So this parent education series is based on, I don't know, some of you might be familiar with these videos called Aid to Life. And this is something that was developed by NAMTA, the North American Montessori Teachers Association, which unfortunately doesn't really exist anymore. But this was a really great parent education initiative where they wanted to provide information about different developmental areas. So this is really good for for any NIDO community and Children's House levels. So it's really not as applicable at the elementary and adolescent level, but you could adapt something. You wouldn't use these videos because these are all very young children, but you could figure out a way to adapt the same structure. And so what they do here is they take the different developmental areas, starting with the two younger ones, which are more infant community, movement and communication. And they focus on, they have these just gorgeous videos showing young kids and what they're able to do developmentally as they grow. And they also have these great books, and I'm not getting any kickbacks or anything from this, but it's just a great program. They have books to go in your parent ed library that have all kinds of ideas about development and how to, at home as part of your family life, support the development in these different areas with children. So, so you have movement, and then communication, and then independence and self-discipline. So the independence and self-discipline are more relevant for the Children's House age kids. But a lot of the information and movement and communication is there too. So what I did was I paired each topic. I had one night a month for 4 months, and each night focused on one of these topics. And so for our first one on movement, I had the guide paired with an occupational therapist who happens to be my partner right now. That's how we got to know each other. She's a developmental occupational therapist named Barbara Laborski. And so she came and she presented along, and then the guide presented, and I'll go through the structure of how the evening proceeded. But I paired, for each of these developmental areas, I paired them with a medical professional. And so this wasn't geared for, you know, inclusion or for only children who had challenges, or, you know, this was a general series in development as a whole, child development. So we did the first one on movement with an OT, and then the second one was on communication, and I invited a speech and language pathologist to come and talk about typical development and then red flags. And then the third one was on independence, which I paired with a psychologist, a child psychologist. And then for self-discipline, you could either pair with a psychologist or maybe even a psychiatrist if you wanted to address issues along the lines of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. You might want to invite a psychiatrist to come and talk. But basically, they were talking about typical development, what parents should know about the natural progression of development in these 4 areas and what it looked like. And then so we showed the video first, and then the medical specialist gave a presentation. Sometimes they gave PowerPoints. The psychologist chose to just sit in a big circle, which is a really great idea for discussion, and just have a conversation with them about development in that area. And then the guide would give a presentation or demonstration of all the different things that they do in the Montessori classroom that support development in that area. And that's a fabulous way to show off your Montessori program and to have the guides recognized as the experts that they are in development. And it's a great marketing thing. So we opened it up. It was really successful. And then the second year we opened it up to the community and advertised it more widely to get more people in to learn. And then the last piece was having a conversation with the parents about, well, what do you do at home that helps your child with movement or with communication, and what more could you do? Along with this program, they have these handouts to give the parents. It's 2-sided on how they can prepare the environment at home, provide opportunities for skill development and movement, and then about the importance of making time for that in their schedule, and then 10 different activities that they can do at home in order to support that. So it's a tremendous resource that's already there and ready for you to use. So just to recap, so you know, I would say in the time of COVID, this would probably be done on Zoom, but you know, before that, I would welcome everybody in and we provided a snack and a beverage, tried to just make it very warm and welcoming, and then have the parents all introduce themselves. So, and talk about, you know, give the age of their child, and so that everybody gets a chance to share that. Then we play the video, and the video gives you, you know, a lot of things to talk about. Then the medical professional usually ties in what they're saying with, you know, from what they saw in the video. And then the Montessori guides talk about the wonderful ways that the Montessori classroom is designed and set up to promote these areas of development. And then the last part is a group discussion. And that's fantastic. We learned so much about our families that we didn't know before. In fact, they shared things that their children were doing at home that they never fessed up to the guide. The guides were just there like, hey, she never told me that. But there was something about the way it was set up that made them feel more comfortable sharing about some of the challenges and things that they were seeing at home. Because often parents get real defensive, you know, when you say, well, are you seeing anything at home? But it just brings down those walls so that this, you know, talking to an occupational therapist is not this big scary thing that you're going to be labeled for life and it's going to be, you know, it's a terrible thing. They get to talk to and get to know the OT or the speech person or whoever, and they see them around the school and, you know, serving other children in the environment. So they're much more likely to reach out and feel comfortable. So I just wanted to share this with you because it's just something that I just kind of figured out over time. And the Aid to Life series just seems to perfectly tie together so many of the pieces. And it's just a wonderful parent education piece, so that you can do it over 4 months and, you know, once a month, so that they can really get some really good insights on their child. And you can, you know, encourage the parents, if you've got kids who have some little challenges that you think need to be looked at, you can say, hey, why don't you come? So so I just wanted to share these. So there's one on the one on movement, and we know that that's so important all the way through. I mean, the topic goes all the way up through adolescence, the importance of movement in education. And so that's something you'd have to find different videos, of course, but you could still choose these same topics, and communication, independence. Of course, we Montessorians are really big on independence, but probably the most common reason for sending a child away from a Montessori school is because they can't be independent. And so this is really, and it's really an important skill that children need to develop, and a lot of children need help with this. And there are so many ways that we can help support children so that maybe not today, maybe not next month, but maybe by the end of the year, they are independent. And then self-discipline. And that's another area that Montessori has a lot to shine. So, you know, it's a way of talking about these areas that really shows off the Montessori school program and the expertise of the guides in understanding this, and then to start conversations about, well, what if something's, you know, not quite going right? You know, how do we start having those difficult conversations? So then the last thing I just wanted to say is that Montessori 100 years ago, it was completely consistent with contemporary developmental science when it comes to the importance of early identification, early intervention, support, and treatment. This holistic approach, which is that health and development are inseparable from education, and the opportunities and urgencies of the different planes of development. And these are all, they're just completely aligned with today's medical thinking. So, and you know, the bottom line is that Montessori education is a medical approach. It comes from medicine and special education. And so it is the best place for these kids, but they do have different needs and they need something different. So I want to leave a few minutes for you guys to ask questions, but I just wanted to share my organization. We opened 3 years ago, and our vision is Montessori and medicine working together to include all children. And our mission is helping you all to build the capacity, to build your knowledge and your resources and your partnerships to help you include more children with different needs. This is a picture of our graduating class from 2019 in Milwaukee at the Penfield Montessori School, where we held the very first course in English. It was never translated into English before, Foundations of Montessori Inclusion. And that was at the early childhood level. This next program that they're coming to provide, they're working with us to provide, is Foundations of Montessori Inclusion in elementary. And then our third one will be in the adolescent plane. So they're donating their time. They're not charging us, but we have to pay for the interpreters, which is super expensive. But we did talk them into doing a fully online course starting in August at the elementary level. So it will go 2 weeks in the first 2 weeks of August, and then 1 day a month through April. And I'll be sending out information to you all about that. And please send your teachers who are elementary trained in August. Another course that our organization developed because we had to cancel the in-person course last summer, we decided to do a virtual course. And so I worked with Barbara Laborski, a developmental occupational therapist, and Professor Michelle Lane Barmapov, who's an world-renowned autism and Montessori specialist. She's developed an entire approach of therapy for children with autism using Montessori. And then I present on serving children with dyslexia in a Montessori classroom. I'm an Orton Billingham tutor, and I do that crosswalk between the Orton skills and Montessori curriculum. So we're running that again starting in April. It's totally online, 3 months. It's April, May, and June. So if you're interested, then let us know. But anyways, let me get out of this and see if you have any questions.
There was a few questions in the chat. We had a nurse on campus for the past 2 years for a student. It has been a good experience and has not been intrusive. That's great. And then from Wally, it is a great goal to include children with learning difficulties in the classroom environment. Most private Montessori schools do not have the resources to support these children. How and where do the teachers acquire skills to support children with learning difficulties? Is your institute the only place to train the teachers?
So yeah, there's a number of questions there. Okay, so first of all, I'll say that AMS is doing an inclusion endorsement, and that's organized and been developed with Dr. Joyce Pickering, who's a speech and language pathologist and a Montessori educator. And they have at the Shelton School in Dallas, they have a special needs school for children with language learning disabilities. And so they've developed a program called MACAR, Montessori Applied to Children at Risk. So that has been around and available for probably a couple decades. And but other than that, the Hellberger work is really exciting and new. That covers all disability areas. Let's see. So I want to address the question of the private Montessori schools. So private Montessori schools are developing inclusive programs. So you have to think creatively, and you really have to have a passion to do the work. But you can do several things. So at my school, the parents were responsible for paying for the specialist who came into the school. And I don't have time to go into all of that, but you can set up arrangements where they have the liability and they take the payments directly from the parents, but you do still have the opportunity to collaborate with them. There's also something that's very underutilized in the United States, which is the Medicare for school-based Medicare. There is a learning curve in doing the paperwork, but that's something that I'm hoping that my organization is going to be able to provide some guidance in. There are funds out there. So we had one child who was on the autism spectrum, and she brought with her a behavior specialist. A BCBA was in charge, and then assigned, it was 3 hours a day for every day. And it was absolutely fabulous. And the staff learned so much from watching the professional work. And there is a huge learning curve, and it's a human capital investment to bring medical people and therapists and specialists into the school to work with the kids and find ways to help that learning transfer happen so your staff become better at it. So, you know, there are ways to find insurance companies, between insurance companies and Medicare, there are ways to find supports for your children and to build up this capacity. A lot of private schools have Orton Gillingham tutors, and sometimes they just put it in the budget. Other times they charge the parents for that service. So let's see, but the partnering can be helpful both ways, because so we have a school with 70 or 80 students, and the therapists, we would refer the parents to the therapists. They were part of our team. They were in our parent handbook. So since we had partnered with them, we would refer to them, and they would do a 15-minute free consultation. If the parent wanted to go forward, they could, or if they wanted to find somebody else, they could. We welcomed all specialists into the school. But usually once they get to know your medical people, then they feel really comfortable working with them as well. So I'm trying to look at some other questions. Yeah, parents have to pay the cost at a private school setting. Proportionate share funding, yeah. So if we do a Medicare reform or Medicare for all type program, we're not sure where we're going in this country with universal health care, but that could be a tremendous open door for bringing more help into the schools. And just because of the nature of the Montessori classroom, specialists can seamlessly come in and out. I would also make, as an administrator, I would stand in for the teachers so that they could have private conversations with the therapist to catch up and share information. It is a big work, but it's also, it pays off, because then, people know that you're a place who's going to really look after their kids. And so, especially starting in an area of like Orton Gillingham, providing those services, there's up to 20% of children have dyslexia or language learning disability. And so if you can meet those needs, you will have a lot of kids, families who would love for their kids to be there. So yeah, I can share my phone number and email address. And if anybody wants to get in touch with me, our website's easy to remember. It's www.montessori4inclusion.org. And we're almost done with our marketing for those, the events that I talked about, the course, the inclusion course from the European trainers, that's going to start in August, and then our course, which focuses on autism, sensory motor, and dyslexia, which starts in April. And we had a, thank you, Camille. We had a fabulous turnout. We had 94 teachers from 17 countries sign up for our first course last August. And it was a fabulous group. It was a fabulous course. So I recommend both of them. And if you have any questions, you want to reach out, our organization is to serve Montessori schools in problem solving and building capacity. How can we build capacity to serve more children? So we are here to help you, and we have connections and communications with schools all over the world. So hopefully we can help you with whatever your question is. So, and I'll go ahead and put in my phone number. It's on the website too. So it was wonderful to meet you all or see you all. Hopefully I'll meet you sometime, and keep up the great work. Stay healthy, stay strong. If we do talk in our courses about remote learning too, because kids with different types of challenges and with special needs are really struggling. Some of my kids love being at home because school was not real good for them. That's kids in traditional schools, but anyway, so it's been a real pleasure. Thank you for having me. And I'm really excited to meet you and talk further.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Your presentation was great. It's getting a lot of thank yous in the chat.
Yeah, I'll send my PowerPoints. I have to figure out I have to get it converted to a PDF, and then I'll send that to you, Camilla. And I also have a 1-page with those 2 quotes that we base our work on. And I'll also attach that so that you can have that as a reference, because sometimes you get a little pushback.
Yeah, definitely. We'd love to have that. And thank you so much for coming on and talking to this group of Montessorians.
Oh, you're welcome. How many do we have? How many people are here?
I think some of them drop off because we normally finish at 30 past, but we were running a little bit late today. So we apologize for that again, everyone. But yeah, I think there's 20 left.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for coming and listening. And we're here to help you include more kids and figure it out. So just
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Have a great day, everybody.